Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Doug DiBergilio. I am a SCORE mentor in Minnesota, also a member of the Education Committee. And thank you for joining our webinar on proven sales techniques everyone can apply. And before I turn it over to Gene for his presentation, just a few announcements. You will receive a copy of his slides and the recorded webinar later this afternoon or tomorrow. The recorded webinar will also be available on the SCORE YouTube site. So you're going to get that. You'll receive that. With Q&A, please go ahead and type them into the Q&A box. And Gene's going to take them as he can during the presentation. I'll look at chat as well, but would prefer you put it in Q&A, but we'll look at both. And then we'll have time at the end also if you have additional questions. Now, with that, let me just share some information about SCORE. So SCORE is a nationwide not-for-profit that is an independent resource partner of the U.S. Small Business Administration. And the great thing about SCORE is that we've got 10,000 volunteers through 300 chapters nationally. And those volunteers are most largely retired business executives from every possible background in business, so we can then effectively co-mentor you. And we can also bring in other mentors with expertise should you need that. So in Manatee, Minnesota, Minnesota is Manatee and Sarasota County, except for the Northport. We have 90 volunteers, and I'd highly encourage you to request one if you have a need, and we'll explain what we can do for you here in a minute. Our chapter has recently been recognized as District Chapter of the Year. So how can we help you? Well, there's many ways we can help you. Of course, the greatest thing is it's free. We are giving back. This is our way of giving back, trying to help small businesses in the startup phase, research and planning. Ton to do there. We have lots of resources on our website, on the SBA website. Our mentors also have access to a number of templates and a number of other things that may help you as you contemplate pre-startup, which does take a lot of time. In the startup phase, same thing, all kinds of things happening. The mentor, we are here as a sounding board resource for you, not a decision maker, but again, we can help you with that. In business and growing, amazingly, in my 36-year banking career, I witnessed a lot of businesses actually fail because they grew too fast. So growing is a good thing. You want to grow, but we can help advise you in managing your margins and how to do it successfully. And also buying, selling, or exiting your business. We have a whole team dedicated to that in Minnesota, and we're happy to help you with that, or perhaps you're just in the dream phase. So a lot of these areas we can provide assistance. If you want to request a mentor, please visit score.org/Minnesota. You can see our profiles. You can pick one yourself or generally just request one. You can also see the workshop calendar, upcoming workshops, and recorded webinars. We want to thank our sponsors without whom we could not be able to present to you today. So thanks to these very important people listed here. I want you to see them, and we are appreciative of their support. Now, I'm going to turn it over to Gene. Gene will introduce himself, but first we have to stop sharing my screen and let him share his. So give us a minute, please. Okay, Gene, we'll try to get to yours.
All right, here we go.
All right, can everyone see that? Maybe somebody send me a chat. It looks like I can see it fine, so we should be good.
All good.
All right.
All right. Thank you, Doug. And I also want to thank Diane McKeever at SCORE and John Stewart, who locally here in my neck of the woods introduced me to the Minnesota SCORE team. So it's great to be here today with all of you virtually. And we're going to make a really good use of this time, everyone. Not optimal to do this online, but we can get a heck of a lot out of it. I think the way we do that is let's be as interactive as we can. So don't hesitate to ask questions or post them in the chat or in the question box as Doug indicated. and we'll do our best to get to them. If not, while we're going, then we'll get to those as we wrap up in the tail end. So I'm going to start with a story. It was a typical day at Assumption High School, a Catholic high school in Iowa. In the fall, the sun was shining bright, and you could tell it was gorgeous because the lights were emanating. The light was emanating through the windows of the cafeteria because it was lunch hour. It was well into lunch hour. The hustle and bustle of the cafeteria could be felt almost, certainly could be heard in the form of clanking silverware, trays, chairs being moved in and out as people shuffled around and returned their food or gathered their food, and the chatter from all the discussion. And the doors were shut because it was well into the lunch hour. All of a sudden, the doors opened. It caught everyone's attention. A meek-looking young man, a freshman, walked in. Certainly caught the attention of Father Mike Phillips, who Father Mike was standing as he usually does when everyone else sits, and sort of oversees the activities, the fun, the break from all the studious activity that occurs during lunchtime. This young man entered the cafeteria, clearly smaller, had to be a freshman, ninth grader, and started to figure out, okay, go get the food. Got the food, but it was a busy day in the cafeteria, certainly about 300 people in that room. And he started to look for a seat, which was not easy to find. But it turns out that as he gathered his food and started to walk back, there was a seat open by some people that he was familiar with clearly, but maybe didn't know, weren't his best buddies calling him in. So he sat down in that open seat, and as he started to approach and sit down, he noticed that the guys guys sat together. The guys at the table were playing a game, and this game is one he hadn't seen before. It was you can picture a flat like cafeteria sort of sitting table with chairs on either side, and so two people would be facing each other. One person would hold their hands as such. I'm doing a visual here if you're not looking. And the other person across from him had his eyes closed and was taking his hands and trying to interleave them between the other person's hands with his eyes closed. And so this ninth grader just noticed this as he walked up, that everyone seemed to be playing that game in these tables area where he was sitting. And he even noticed a couple of people who were doing that had their eyes closed, but they're kind of peeking, opening up their eyes. And then the other person would say, "You're cheating, stop cheating, close your eyes, you have to do this, close your eyes." And they were counting. So quickly he sort of figured out what was going on. And someone said, "Yeah, it's really fun. You try to do this, you close your eyes. And how many times can you do this without hitting the other person's hands with your eyes closed?" And so the goal is to do it as much as you can. So he, he had his food, and then they said, "Come on, give it a try." So he went to give it a try, and so the person, across from him put his hands. He started to do that, and was successful and going back and forth without hitting that other person's stationary hands there. And next thing you know, things started getting quiet in this otherwise, bustling cafeteria. But his intent on doing it. But things got really quiet. He stopped, opened his eyes, and noticed no one was sitting around him anymore. Everyone at his table and the adjacent tables had scattered. And once he opened his eyes, he noticed that, and then a bunch of people started laughing. So he was had. He was had, and interestingly enough, the people didn't return to the table. Father Mike Phillips had to walk over and sort of, tap that guy, young man on the shoulder and say, hey, it's okay. They pulled one over on you, no worries, and call the other students back to sit around the table with him. So interesting day for that freshman, right? So the question I have for you is that freshman, do you think that freshman will experience high school or would experience high school in the same way the rest of that day, the next week, the next month? Or do you think that changed that person's perspective of that high school? Hard for you to all yell out at once, but yes or no? Flip in a yes or no if you would. Okay, it did. That young man was me, and it certainly affected the way I, brought trust or had trust or gave trust in people and in circumstances at that school. So I hope that was an interesting story to start things off. I'm going to go to the next slide here. And we're going to skip right over it. If we're in person, this is a sales training. We certainly want to get to know each other. So this format doesn't really allow for it too much. But if there's any way to, to facilitate that outside of here, do it. Or certainly if you, if you go to sales trainings in person, get to know your colleagues that you're training with. Today, we're going to talk about a few things that are going to cover, and you're going to get some takeaways on transactional selling, why it's not as effective, buyer behaviors that are important, and a couple techniques. What word pops up quickly? Those who can chat quick. What word pops up the most frequent here in this saying by Henry Ford? I'm not going to read it to you. Yes. 4 times if you count the contraction, right? You. There's a good reason for that. And that's because we start in sales with you. Sales should start with you, the salesperson. So we've got a brain that has a very complicated parts and inner workings, and I'm not a neurologist, but the two important parts that we think about when we think about selling and buying and the types of human behaviors that we're thinking about here is this prefrontal cortex. You've probably heard of that term before, the PFC, and then the limbic system. And they go by different names sometimes. But the difference here is important, and it's important to understand. So the prefrontal cortex is your rational brain. It's the conscious. It's what when you're consciously thinking, you're using that prefrontal cortex. Your thinking is relatively slow. It's more methodical. It's also referred to as cold cognition. If you've heard that term, that's what this is. Another good way to think about it. Well, limbic system is in complete contrast of that. It's the opposite. So it's really fast at processing. It's called hot cognition. It's emotions, and it's survival. It manages autonomous functions of your body, things that you don't have to think about, breathing, turning a steering wheel. Most of us don't think when we turn a steering wheel anymore, and when we drive, it happens. So we've made that autonomous. Why is that important? Well, I'm going to walk through a simple little example. We need a little help from you guys to do this. I'd like you to think of a couple things, or one thing. We're going to come up with a couple that you've purchased in fairly recently that are substantive, that are fairly significant. So what I mean is not a nice dinner, not 20, 100, whatever, but hundreds of dollars, maybe thousands of dollars, something like that. So who has purchased something that reasonably, last year or two or whatever, and just name that, if you will, post that in the chat. Could be an iPhone, for example. Those are in the hundreds of dollars, or an Android, whatever it might be. Okay, so we've got some good ones here. We got water filter, couch, house. I assume that's what, house is what you meant. Let's go with one of those. Car, excellent. Thank you very much. Perfect. So, when we think about, or when you think about buying a house or a car, what is the reason? So let's all kind of go to the house one. That's a good one. Let's go to the house. Why did you buy that house? So just, if you didn't buy a house, imagine you did. And why did you buy that house? Let's see a few reasons. Okay. Security, safety, excellent. What else? Neighborhood, size, space, tired of living in the apartment. Next to a loved one to take care of, excellent. Investment security, okay. More kids, you need, that sort of falls under space. Oh, excellent. Anything else? Ownership, we'll put that in the financial category. Proximity to work, being, that's convenience. So all good reasons, right? If we look at that list now of the reasons that you bought a house or pretended to buy a house, what's common across those reasons? Does anyone see some common things across, or some common elements to all those reasons? Even if we look at one that, let me see what your needs, my needs, your needs, sure. And what kind of, that's good, JR. What kind of needs are those? And I would say, like, even financial, the financial benefit or need of having that, what's the underlying thing beyond that financial need? What does that provide? What does the financial benefit provide you? Stability, shelter, wealth, peace of mind. Yes, exactly. So that you're hitting this perfect. Freedom, safety, all these are good. If you start to think about and look at some of these things that we talked about, do you see what's underlying them? It's emotional and relationship driven needs oftentimes that are predominant. And even when there is one that's more of like practical, like financial, there's often an emotional need behind that as well. That's not transactional, so to speak, which financial seems so transactional. Safety is a real important, obviously crucial need, but so too are the emotional needs. But every one of those, if you scroll through the chat here, identity, family needs, size, etc., the needs are much more focused on those internal needs. And those internal needs, emotions, feelings, those type of things, that's what the limbic system manages. It is where they emanate. It's where they live. Your emotions and your feelings live there. They don't live up in this prefrontal cortex. They live here. So the house example is a good one. I'm glad someone brought that up. Quick example of what I'm talking about here on how people make decisions, and the basis for those decisions when buying is what we're getting to the root of here, is when people buy a house. Let's just give an example of a husband and wife. They're touring around. They're going to visit a particular house and they cross that threshold, they walk into the house, they open it and they walk in with their realtor into the house. How much time on average between the time they walk into the house and they do their house tour, et cetera, and walk out, how much time do you think it takes for them to make a buy decision or not? But let's say this is the house. How long did it take them on average? I love everyone's prompt jumping in the chats. It's so important. Thanks for the feedback, you guys. Oh, you got some good guesses here. So we're getting closer. Everyone's going down. That's great. It turns out that the average is 8 seconds between the time the threshold is crossed and the decision is made. But guess where the decision is made? It's made here. Here. I'm sorry, I can't. I'm not draw. You can see me drawing around. It's made in the limbic brain. It's made with a feeling, with an emotional. And what happens after that is that once that couple, that husband and wife, they both have that good feeling and they probably looked at each other and winked and they grabbed hands or squeezed a little tight and this is the one, honey, kind of thing. And they knew it. They knew it. And then after that, then what happens is what we call post-rationalization. That's when the prefrontal cortex gets engaged and starts to tap into the feelings and says, oh, I like this. Why do I like this? And starts to come up with explanatory reasons why I would like this. Oh, love the living room space. So the kitchen is amazing. I'll be able to make great dinners here. Or gosh, that's got there's a awesome man cave here. Or I love the lanai. Or whatever it is, you start to find rational reasons why that is a good decision, but you've really already made the decision emotionally and with your feelings. And now you're coming up with the rationalization, the reasons that you can explain and use to other people as to why you decided to buy this house. And so they've done a lot of studies on home buying, and people have trouble really understanding those feelings. And one of the ones that has come up is that it reminds them of their childhood environment somehow, some way, and they get a quick attachment to that particular home, whereas there's probably several homes that they've walked through that look, on paper just like the other ones, but that emotional component. Okay, so we're going to go to the next slide, but the takeaway from that is to think about that buyer, what they're going through, and if you use your emotions and that feelings and those needs are so central to making a large purchase like a house, and we could go through the same exercise with a car and with a phone. You would see if you do that on your own, same result. If they'll do that for large purchases, certainly that would have significant influence on medium and smaller size purchases. So there's really no purchase that is made personally, or we argue professionally, that doesn't involve a significant amount of emotions. So we're going to transition now to, we're not going to do this activity because we're not in person. So just, I think, imagine yourself in a typical scenario, whether you've jumped in an elevator, and lo and behold, there's someone next to you. You don't know them, but you know that they work. They're a leader at this company that you're actually wanting to try to sell your product or service to. And you have 30 seconds because whatever floor they're going to, you're going to get there and they're going to duck out, or you're going to duck out. And so it's just you and him or her. You have the opportunity to engage in conversation. What does that look like? We don't have to answer here. But what I wanted to get to is what that typically looks like is what you're seeing on the screen. So that typically is going to look like you're going to talk about yourself, or maybe your company or your services or whatever. That's usually where people start, is the what. And it's so common, and it's not necessarily interesting. You don't raise awareness, you don't get interest as well. Those first two steps of the four-step process, awareness, interest, desire, and action are the process that someone goes through to buy. You're not really captivating in any way at all when you do that. So what we want to start with in sales, we want to get to our why and their why, even, who we're talking with. It's great to get to their why, but no one really wants to start a relationship with which sales. We're really starting and want to develop a relationship. And we're talking about a business, business here, selling something, whether it's selling to a consumer or selling to another business. We want to start a relationship. Most of the selling of things that we do is not one time. It can be one time, but oftentimes we want a customer for life or a repeat customer, and we want to develop a relationship, certainly a business relationship, if not more. And we just learned that emotional feelings are so important to people in buying. Why would that disappear when we're talking about two people? We were talking about buying a house, and the emotions of that were really so important. So if you're talking about establishing a relationship, how more important is it to know and understand that person and their why? Why are they doing what they're doing? Why is their company in business? Whether that's plumbing or marketing or whatever it is. Why are they doing it? Is it only to make money? Maybe, but usually not. Usually there's really good reasons people are doing what they do. They chose to do what they do and work for a company they are working for. And those are very interesting to people. And it allows them to understand you and your organization better. So that's where we want to start if we can, and avoid, essentially we want to avoid jumping right into a business or product discussion. It's more effective. So there's ways to think about your why. And that gentleman in the background, those last two slides, if you hadn't seen him before, Simon Sinek, he's a really sharp guy. He has a really nice TEDx talk on the why, and I recommend it. What do we mean by your why? Why do you get out of bed? Why do you believe? Presumably you believe in your product or service and your company. Why should people come to you? Why should they trust you? What do you stand for and against? And why should they care? Everything isn't a transaction. Most people want to be engaged as a buyer. They want to be engaged in a really positive way and feel like they're doing something with their money that's productive and helpful, and not just buying something that only benefits them. Most people have broader mindsets than that. Okay. So in the interest of time, we're going to continue moving along here. But if at any time you have questions, just pop them in the Q&A or in the chat box. We're going to transition away from the why here, and we're going to go to storytelling. You noticed I started out with a story, and I did that because I wanted to demonstrate the importance of storytelling, give an example of what storytelling looks like. I didn't use it in a product or service or sales per se setting. But that's okay. We're all storytellers, and we all know how to do it, and we all do it. What we typically fail to do in sales is we typically fail to do that in our profession. So we'll tell stories to friends. We'll go on a vacation and we'll come back and we'll tell our friends a story, something that happened to us, something that we saw, something that we experienced, something that we did. And we'll tell that in a neat little story. And it catches the attention of, our friend or whoever we're telling that story to. They're very interested. And it's not by accident that we do that. We could have just sort of ripped off some facts, but we usually weave in some, the circumstances, sights, smells, the various senses, how we were feeling at the time, or how something made us feel, or something that surprised us. Again, all kinds of emotions will usually weave into our story so that it captivates that other person, and they're interested and they're wanting to see, how does that story end? Like, and did someone, overcome something? Did something good happen? Was it a sad story and someone got, hurt? And what lesson was learned, or whatever the case may be. And it turns out that we've been doing storytelling for as long as we've been humans. And so this goes back to the brain we talked about earlier. In our development as humans, that prefrontal cortex sort of learned this, and we didn't have the ability as humans to write or put something down on paper or any other media or medium for a long time. And storytelling was the means for sharing information, and certainly across generations. And we all sort of know that. And what that means is that we're innately built to be storytellers, but to also understand, listen to, and have our interest piqued when someone tells a story. So you all have stories personally, but you all have stories professionally too. And don't limit your storytelling to your personal life. Use stories in your professional work. Use them as a as a salesperson in the sales process. So this slide covers why. I already covered a bunch of that, but there's research done. This points to two outcomes of Harvard, that it creates a sense of connection. That's that limbic brain. You're not making any connections like emotionally and human and feeling with your thinking rational brain. That's back here. That's something that's really hard to describe. But it turns out that when someone tells you, this is an important thing for sales too. I'm just wrapping up a lot into this slide. It turns out that if you tell a good story to someone that they listened to and had interest in, that one thing alone will increase their trust of you a little bit. So you don't know me. I looked at the list. I don't think any of you know me. Maybe you do. That's great. If I've got some folks out there I know, but so most of you don't know me from Adam. Never met me before. You have no basis to necessarily trust me other than my credentials and the nice things Doug said about me. But I told you a story, and you'll notice that a lot of good presenters, leaders, salespeople will weave a story in. They'll often do it in the front end of a discussion because it engenders trust. It's not something you can explain, but it happens. When someone tells you a story, if you think about it yourself, that's one of the tricks in sales we recommend a lot is sit in the buyer's seat as often as you can. Think about the perspective of the buyer. And I've felt this myself. Someone told me a good story. I don't know who they are. And like, you just feel better about that person. You're better connected. And that better connected leads to a little bit of trust. So they have a little bit of trust. Trust is a continuum, as we know. It's not an on or off. You can trust someone a little and you can trust someone a lot. You can trust someone to walk your dog. That's not the same as trusting someone to take your kid on a camping trip for the weekend, right? Two different things. So building trust, we know, is fundamental to developing a relationship. And we know relationships are important for people to want to trade, to do business with us, to buy something from us, whether that's a consumer or whether that's a business. So storytelling is a really good, useful, important tool that starts that sense of connection. So really, 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 really important. And I'll just interject here. The most important thing probably about all of sales, but certainly storytelling, is authenticity, being genuine. So tell stories that are your stories whenever you can. Like the story I shared was my story. You can tell stories about other people and things that you've seen or others do, but they won't resonate as well. They just won't. The passion that you bring to your story, the firsthand perspective, the impact it had on you or others you were with that you felt, saw, experienced, can't replicate that by telling someone else's story. So whenever you can. And it doesn't have to be a grand story. Mine was a little elaborate, right? A little bigger one, the one that was actually impactful in my life, and I never forgot that. I didn't have any ill will to those guys. I know them all today. They're good guys, right? They just goofed on me. I mean, they tricked me. But it was memorable, right? It stuck. And that's what number 2 is here that Harvard says is stories stick. They stick in your memory. A good story that resonates with you is really hard to forget, even if you don't want to remember it, because stories can have bad outcomes too. And we all know. And if you can tell that story a couple times to different people, certainly it'll stick with you, but you'll actually get better at telling it too. Storytelling is a skill, just like everything we do. We can get better at it. Okay, so we're just going to give a little bit of evidence here on storytelling on the sticking part here. This is a graph that simply represents what does recall look like. And I think you guys most of us know that there are things that impact recall, our ability to recall something. Why is recall important? Because sales is not a one-time event, right? Most sales, and certainly B2B, are a series of small sales that culminates in the final purchase action that results in a purchase. And so those occur over time. And so for that to work, there has to be good recall so that you can pick up where you left off and to advance that sales through its process and cycle naturally till it gets to its culmination of a purchase, right? So if there's no recall, then you're starting over every time, and that's not going to work. So how do you get that that discussion, that interest that you maybe arose in an initial conversation? How do you get it from short-term memory into long-term memory? Well, stories is one really good way. So here's what the recall curve looks like, or retention curve looks like in a normal circumstance. But we're gonna see that stories change that dynamic. They build bridges. This is just a quote. We don't know who said this, but they essentially build bridges in the mind. It's um, it remains, it stays with you, even when you're away. And there's, I'll get to that in a moment, when it stays with you the best. But all we're doing here is we're just representing, this is not a mathematically correct curve. It represents we're bending the retention curve is all we're doing by telling a good story in the right way. It's going to way increase the recall. And how does that work best is when you tell a story. As I mentioned, one aspect of it before, it's genuine. It doesn't have to be incredibly elaborate or unbelievably meaningful. It just needs to be in that story format. And we all know what that is. So practice it, practice that story format. And you can even say, it helps me. I do it. So I say, I'm going to tell you a story. It gets my mind going, oh, okay. Gets me in story mode. I'm going to tell a story now. Doesn't mean I'm going to make things up. That's not what we mean by storytelling. It means we're going to present something that is kind of has a starting point, and then there's an element of something that changes along the way that was typically unexpected, and then there's usually going to be some result, something that occurred as a result of that change. So those sort of 3 steps. And what you want, or the best stories, are when the listener to the storyteller looks like this person here, and they put their hands over there, and they, oh my golly, metaphorically put their hands over their head and go, oh my golly, that's me. You put yourself, you're listening to the story, you're so excited, you're interested, you can relate to it so much that you put yourself in the story, whether it's the protagonist or maybe someone else in the story. Maybe that protagonist is the hero, whatever, but you feel for that person, and it could be you. That's how well the story was, you relate to it. You say, oh, that's happened to me, or that could happen to me. Oh, I know how that would feel, or I feel for that person. Now you're tapping into the emotions of that listener, and they're able to relate and connect to it, which is so very important in the storytelling process. Okay. So we want the that's me effect. Okay. How to create stories, what do those look like in a business context is the same way they look like in a personal setting. You simply apply them. And we're gonna talk about a simple example here in a minute. And again, we're not in a place to be able to do this live with audio and in person, but that's okay. You can practice doing this, but it's not complicated. It needs to be in story format, like we talked. It needs, at best, if you can pull in as many senses as you can. So paint a picture, paint a visual picture, and pull in the other senses as well. And then there has to be, as I mentioned, there's something that changes, and then there's an outcome, or a lot of times it's referred to as a consequence. Something occurred. There was a consequence of that change or that behavior, that activity within the story. And that consequence is like the punchline, so to speak, of the story. It's the result, the end of the story. And change here is sort of your central element. And that's what I reinforce with my story is, did I change as a result of that story of what happened there? You bet I did. I changed as a result. I don't think to the negative. I think I became a little less naive in my particular story. But there's usually a consequence, and in business, a lot of times we'll turn this consequence, it'll be a learning or an opportunity for that particular maybe prospective client. We tell them a story that occurred with one of your other clients, for example, and what they learned through the process and how it helped them build their business and become more effective in whatever, producing whatever product or delivering whatever service they do. So, okay, let me advance the slide here. There we go. If we were in person, we'd do this, but I would encourage you, if you're not telling a lot of stories now, or any stories now, a great way to start is to talk about how or why, more importantly, why you joined your business, or maybe you're a business owner and you started your business. That's very relevant in whatever business setting. People want to know. That harkens back to what I talked about earlier, your why. People want to know, why are you there? Why are you with ABC Co? Why are you with like Sales Geek? Why am I with Sales Geek? Why are you with, Jill's accounting services? Why?
Gene,
There's
real
some
quick,
reason.
question, Gene.
Sure.
Doug, we do have usually a 1 o'clock stop time.
Yep.
So I know I'm reminding you, I know where you are in your slides. I think we're
Yep.
answering questions. There is a Q&A already out there. And if you already
Okay.
answered that, you may have, but just
Okay.
want to give you a quick reminder.
Awesome. Thank you, Doug. Thanks, James, for the question. Let me just drive a point home here real quick, and we're at the point of wrapping. So you guys, can you see if I told a decent story, which is to answer these questions on the chat? Does anyone remember the name of the high school? Or you can answer any of these questions. Or the priest's name. Or what grade I was in, the game we were playing, or the capacity of the cafeteria. Does anyone know any of these? Or have I lost you guys? Freshman in the cafeteria. There we go. Grade 9, 300 student. Perfect. So unless you guys recorded all that stuff on your pen and paper, which I assume you would have no desire, interest, need to do, right? You remember those things because I wove them in a story. Okay. So that shows, hopefully you remembered some of those. It's hard to expect everyone to remember everything about your story. But they remember the important parts, and important parts to them. Okay. So this is where we're wrapping up here, and we talk about what we covered. I want to try to answer, I think it was James's question. It looks like it's gone from the Q&A. Oh, there it is. What is your best way of closing a sale? James, that's a great question. There's just not enough time to talk about all the inner workings of closing. But I think what the method that works the best for me is to not think of closing as a separate activity, and it needs to be done at a particular, and clearly it's at the near the end of it. But if you think of closing that way, and all you're doing is preparing for that right moment when you're sitting across from your prospect, and then you ask for the business, like we sometimes say, right? And then they say, well, I don't, and then you're negotiating, you try to you think of it closing like that. I would suggest that's not the right way to think of closing. because I think that's the hard way. I think that's the way where if you think of closing as an independent sort of setting and and an activity that you're going to put yourself in a position where you're pressuring yourself and likely pressuring that prospect to make a decision that you want them to make, which is, buy. Yeah, I'll buy your product or service. And under those conditions, I think you're much more likely to fail. And so I don't think of closing as that independent last step activity where we build everything up to that point and then we close. Rather, we are actually closing along the way. We're getting buy-in. We're asking, is this something that seems like their business needs more generally, not our particular product and service? So we're getting intent and understanding of their needs. And so along the way, we're building up that essentially that commitment that they need something like this and would benefit, their business would benefit. And that then we're building up also that we're a really good organization, got a great track record, whatever things are that that you do well. You have got high retention in your current client base. You've got great reviews on Google if that's how you measure client satisfaction. You're building all that up along the way very purposefully so that when you get near the end, it's really obvious. They're already bought in, if you will. You've done your closing along the way so that in the end, you're simply saying, it's really a matter of, okay, sounds like we've covered all the aspects that were important to you relative to your business needs and your desire to move forward. Looks like we're covered there. And I've given you the opportunity to ask any final questions, and you didn't have any. When can we get started?
Couple more questions out there for you, Gene.
Yep. Okay.
If you want me to read them to you, can you see them?
Are they in the Q&A? I got
Yeah,
them
they're
on
in
the open
Q&A.
part. All right.
They
Why don't
open
we share
question.
the name of the TEDx again? The TEDx, I don't know if you query or Google Simon Sinek and TEDx and why, those search terms, it should bring up Simon's TEDx talk on the why. Good question. Okay, is there a certain pattern to break down your market research to know where to concentrate your sales growth effort plan? Good question. I can't answer that in a short, quick, without a little bit of back and forth. Susan, that is a good question. To break down your market. You're talking about focusing. I think your question is a really good one because the way I would answer it is this: how to suggest you do that would take a lot more time. But here's where a lot of salespeople fail, and you're asking the right question: is they essentially pursue leads indiscriminately. They get a lead or they get a potential opportunity or they just chase after all of that. What good salespeople do the best, certainly, is they look at the likelihood of actually selling that particular consumer or business. And so that's the first thing to do. Out of all their opportunity, they say, these are the ones more likely for me to sell and there's all kinds of reasons, but you got to figure out those reasons. Once you have those reasons, then you can relatively quickly narrow it down to the ones that are most likely able to and willing and will buy from you. Then they focus their sales efforts there. That's the huge efficiency or effectiveness tool that, believe it or not, a lot of salespeople don't. They just get a lead and they run after it. Okay. First thing you do when you get a lead is assess it. Is that the type of business, client, et cetera? Get a little more information if you need, whatever, that I'm likely to be able to, to have a good fit with and sell my product and service and they'll want to buy it. The answer is no, set it aside and find the next one where the answer is yes. Looks like James pulled up the link for everyone. Thank you, James.
Yeah,
Any
I
other
don't think
questions?
I don't think everyone has that. I think that you can see that he shared it in Q&A. Hopefully, we can I'll put that in chat.
Yes, please do.
Other questions? We got a few minutes left. Anyone else chat or other questions? And let me put this in chat for everyone.
While you're doing that, Doug, I always have one ask of folks at the end of any discussion like this or learning activity is the worst thing you can do is just take this and say, oh, that's general information and just go on your merry way. The best thing you can do is take one or more, but take one thing that you saw here today, one thing, and apply it. Join the 1% club. Take one thing and apply it and get a little bit better. And if we do that, we're going to get better every day.
Great point, Gene. Let me just go to some closing slides. We did the Q&A, and if anybody has any other questions, please let us know. You do have time. So there is still time for questions if anyone has them. And I was just remind everybody again, thank you for attending the webinar. If you have any suggestions, please let us know. Also, what else you may be interested in. We'd also love your review of Gene's presentation, which I thought went very well. And a reminder of here's where you can request a mentor. Visit score.org/Minnesota. And let's see, chat. Let me see if we get anything else. Okay. Thanks, everybody, for joining. And this will conclude our webinar for today. Thank you, Gene.
Thanks, everyone.